The storm came without warning. Thomas had been sailing alone for weeks, far away from the safety of his village, pushing through the rough seas in search of a new life. His small boat, the Seawolf, creaked under the pressure of the waves, its wooden frame groaning in protest. He'd learned the art of sailing from his father, but nothing could prepare him for the fury of the storm that seemed to rise from the ocean itself. Dark clouds gathered overhead, casting an ominous shadow over the water. The wind howled, tearing at the sails and forcing the boat off course. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and Thomas could feel the temperature drop sharply. The sea, once calm, turned violent, its waves crashing against the sides of his boat like 1,000 fists. With trembling hands, Thomas fought to steer the boat, struggling against the fierce wind. But no matter how hard he tried, it was clear he couldn't control the storm. He gritted his teeth as the boat lurched violently, its hull slamming into the waves. The sea was alive, furious and wild, and it seemed to want nothing more than to swallow him whole. "Come on," Thomas muttered to himself, his voice lost in the howling wind. He tightened his grip on the tiller, but the boat was slipping further and further out of control. Another massive wave came crashing down on him, sending water pouring over the sides of the boat. Thomas gasped, choking on the salty water that filled his mouth. He fought to stay afloat, but the wave was too strong. The Seawolf tipped sideways, its mast snapping in two with a deafening crack. The boat was done for. Before he could even process what was happening, the boat capsized, sending Thomas hurtling into the freezing sea. Panic shot through him as he struggled to keep his head above water. The waves were relentless, crashing against him from all sides. He gasped for air, his chest burning from the cold, and the realization hit him. There was no escape. His hands flailed in the water, searching for anything to hold onto. The storm was still raging, the wind screaming in his ears as the waves pulled him deeper into the churning abyss. His arms ached with the effort to stay afloat, but his body was growing weaker with every passing second. The storm was winning. It was stronger than he was, and he couldn't fight it any longer. His vision blurred as exhaustion took over, and the coldness of the water seeped into his bones. He thought he saw a shadow pass under him, something huge, but it was too late. He was sinking, losing the battle against the sea. Then, just as everything began to go dark, something strange happened. The water around him stirred, and a sudden wave lifted him upward, as though the sea was pushing him to safety. For a moment, he thought he was dreaming, but the feeling was real. His body was rising above the waves. He looked up through the rain-soaked air and saw it, a massive creature emerging from the depths. Its silhouette was dark and imposing, stretching high above the water, with eyes that burned like molten gold. The dragon's enormous body rippled through the ocean, its scales gleaming in the flashes of lightning, its wings unfurling like a storm of their own. Thomas's heart skipped a beat as the creature's piercing eyes locked onto his. The dragon was real. The creature's head dipped lower, and Thomas instinctively reached out. To his amazement, the dragon extended its long neck toward him, its massive, clawed paw grasping him with surprising gentleness. The sea around him seemed to still as the dragon lifted him from the water, its powerful grip lifting him higher, away from the storm. Thomas couldn't believe what was happening. His mind was racing. Was this a dream, a hallucination brought on by the cold? But the dragon's touch was solid, warm even as it carefully placed him on its back. "What are you?" Thomas stammered, his voice barely audible over the roaring winds. The dragon didn't answer with words, but its glowing eyes seemed to say everything. The beast was ancient, powerful, and it had chosen to save him. With a mighty flap of its wings, the dragon soared into the air, taking Thomas above the storm. The winds died down, and the dark clouds parted just enough to reveal a sky full of stars. The night had turned from terrifying to awe-inspiring in the span of a few moments. Thomas clung to the dragon's scales, the reality of what was happening slowly sinking in. He was flying on the back of a dragon. The one thing he thought was nothing more than a myth. It was all too much to process, but one thing was clear. He was no longer fighting the sea alone. The dragon circled high above the now calm waters, the island below growing larger as they approached. The storm had passed, but Thomas's life had changed forever. The dragon's roar echoed across the night sky as it descended toward the island, a place that would reveal more secrets than Thomas was ready for. But one thing was certain, his struggle had only just begun. The island loomed ahead, a dark silhouette against the sky. The storm had passed, but the air was still heavy with the remnants of the chaos. Thomas clung to the dragon's back as it glided through the night air, its massive wings beating with powerful strokes that sent gusts of wind rushing past him. The dragon's body was warm beneath him, its scales shimmering like jewels in the moonlight. Despite the surrealness of the moment, Thomas couldn't shake the unease that churned within him. The island below looked unwelcoming, the jagged cliffs rising steeply from the ocean. The water around the island was eerily calm, as if the sea itself had been tamed by the dragon's presence. Thomas could see no sign of life, just the haunting stillness of a place untouched by civilization. As the dragon descended, the ground below grew clearer, rocky, with patches of thick forest that looked as though they hadn't seen human footsteps in centuries. The air was cool and filled with the scent of salt water and damp earth. The dragon's wings fluttered one last time before it landed lightly on a narrow stretch of beach, the impact soft despite its enormous size. The dragon's tail curled around itself as it lowered its head to the ground, careful not to crush anything beneath its weight. Thomas slid off the dragon's back, his legs unsteady after the long ride. His heart raced, and his mind was still trying to process the unbelievable events of the past hours. He had gone from being a helpless sailor, fighting for his life in a storm, to being saved by a mythical creature, a dragon. Now, standing on an unknown island in the middle of the sea, he had no idea what was to come next. The dragon stretched its long neck, its head turning slowly to face Thomas. Its golden eyes glimmered in the moonlight, the depth of ancient wisdom shining in them. It did not seem threatening, but Thomas could feel its power in every fiber of his being. It was an old, wise creature, one that had seen things he could only begin to imagine. Thomas stepped back, his voice catching in his throat. Why did you save me?" he asked, his voice a mixture of awe and confusion. The dragon's gaze softened, but it didn't answer right away. Instead, it lowered its head to the ground, revealing a series of markings on the side of its neck. The symbols were strange, glowing faintly with a blue light, ancient runes that seemed to pulse with life. Thomas reached out instinctively, his fingers brushing over the markings. As soon as he touched them, a strange warmth spread through him, and a voice, not of sound but of thought, filled his mind. "You were chosen, Thomas." The dragon's voice resonated in his head, calm and powerful. "The storm was no accident. The sea is more than it seems, and it has brought you to me." Thomas pulled his hand away, his heart racing. "Chosen? What do you mean? I'm just a sailor." The dragon's golden eyes held a sadness as it gazed at him. "You are more than you think, Thomas. You are the last of the dragon riders. The bond between our kinds has been broken, but it can be reforged. You will protect me, and together we will fight the forces that seek to destroy what remains of this world." Thomas staggered back, his mind reeling. Dragon rider. The words echoed in his head, but they made no sense. He was just a boy from a small fishing village. He had no history, no training, nothing that would explain why the dragon had chosen him. Before he could respond, a low growl echoed from the shadows, cutting through the stillness of the island. The dragon's head snapped up, its body tense, and Thomas instinctively took a step back. From the darkened tree line, a figure emerged, tall and cloaked in black, its eyes glowing with a strange, otherworldly light. The air grew colder, and the ground beneath them seemed to tremble with a sense of impending doom. "It has found us," the dragon growled, its voice filled with warning. "The darkness is coming, you must be ready." The cloaked figure took another step forward, and with it came a chill so sharp it seemed to cut through the air. The figure's eyes glowed brighter now, and Thomas could feel the weight of its gaze on him. The dark figure's presence was oppressive, like a storm waiting to unleash its fury. The dragon snarled, its wings flaring out, but it did not make a move to attack. It was waiting for something, for a sign, or perhaps for Thomas to make a choice. The figure spoke, its voice deep and cold, like the sound of ice cracking. "You should have stayed out of this, human. This island belongs to forces beyond your understanding. You cannot hope to stand against what is coming." Thomas's breath caught in his throat. He didn't know who or what this figure was, but the dragon's reaction told him all he needed to know. This was not just any foe. It was a part of the ancient evil that had hunted dragons for centuries. "You're wrong," Thomas said, his voice trembling but firm. "I don't understand this, but I won't run, I'll fight." The dragon turned to face him, its eyes filled with an ancient fire. "Good. This is the first step, but remember, Thomas, you will need to trust me. You are not just a human anymore. You are bound to me, and your fate is intertwined with mine." The cloaked figure's laughter rang out, a cruel sound that made the hairs on the back of Thomas's neck stand up. "We will see about that," it said, before disappearing into the shadows, leaving nothing but the heavy silence of the island. The dragon's body relaxed slightly, but it didn't lower its guard. "We must prepare. The darkness has found us, and it won't stop until we are destroyed. You must become the protector I need you to be." Thomas nodded, feeling the weight of the dragon's words settle in his chest. The dragon wasn't just an ancient beast, it was an ally, and he was the protector, the last hope for their kind. The island, once eerily calm, now seemed alive with danger. Thomas had no choice but to trust in the dragon and face the darkness that was coming. There was no turning back. His destiny had been set in motion, and it was a destiny that would change everything. If you're excited to find out what happens next, make sure to subscribe and stay tuned for the next part of this incredible adventure. The island, once calm in the aftermath of the storm, now seemed like a place frozen in time, a place of ancient power and deep secrets. As Thomas sat on the beach, the dragon beside him, the reality of the situation began to settle in. He had been saved by a creature of legend, and now he was expected to become its protector. But how could he, a simple sailor, fulfill such a monumental role? His mind raced, trying to make sense of everything, but the pieces just wouldn't fit. The dragon, however, seemed unfazed. It moved with purpose, its body shifting gracefully, as if the very island had been waiting for it. Its golden eyes glowed with a fierce intensity, scanning the shoreline as if searching for something or someone. "The bond must be forged, Thomas," the dragon's voice echoed in his mind. "You are not just a protector, you are the key to saving the world. The storm that brought you here was no accident, it was fate." Thomas looked up at the massive creature, its form stretching high above him. The dragon's scales shimmered like emeralds in the fatting light of the day. Its wings, tucked against its body, seemed to pulse with a power that Thomas could feel even from a distance. But despite its majesty, there was a sense of weariness about the dragon, something ancient, something burdened by time and loss. "What happened to you?" Thomas asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why are you alone?" The dragon's gaze softened, and it slowly turned its head toward Thomas. "I am the last of my kind, Thomas. My ancestors once roamed the seas, protectors of the world. But the darkness came, and one by one my kin fell. Now I am the last dragon, bound by an ancient oath to protect the realm and its people. But I cannot do this alone." Thomas's heart sank as he listened to the dragon's words. It was not just the dragon's past that haunted it, it was the weight of an entire world, a world that was on the brink of collapse. And now, Thomas was part of that world. He was no longer just a sailor. He was tied to something far greater than himself. "What do you want me to do?" Thomas asked, his voice shaky but filled with a new sense of resolve. "How can I protect you?" The dragon's eyes narrowed, as if contemplating his question. "You must first understand the bond between us. You are a dragon rider, whether you realize it or not. Your bloodline has always been connected to mine. That is why the storm brought you to me. It was the only way we could find each other again." Thomas stood up, his legs unsteady as he tried to process everything. Dragon Rider, the word seemed absurd to him. "I don't even know what that means." The dragon's gaze softened once more and it moved closer to him, its enormous form towering over him like a protector. The Dragon Riders were a sacred order, chosen to guard the dragons and maintain balance in the world. But with the fall of my kin, that order was lost. You, Thomas, are the last hope for the dragons and the world. You must take your place among the riders." Thomas shook his head, his mind still reeling. "But I'm not trained for this. I'm just a sailor. I don't know anything about fighting or magic." The dragon lowered its head, bringing its face close to Thomas, its golden eyes staring into his. "You already have what it takes, Thomas. The power is inside you, hidden deep within. All you need is to unlock it. The bond between a dragon rider and their dragon is forged through trust, through understanding. The storm, the island, everything has led you here. This is your purpose." Thomas looked into the dragon's eyes, and for the first time he felt something shift within him. It was as if a door had opened in his mind, a door to a world he had never imagined, a world where dragons, magic, and ancient forces were real. But it was more than that. He felt an undeniable connection to the dragon, something that went beyond words, beyond logic. It was as if their fates had always been entwined, waiting for this moment. He reached out tentatively, his fingers brushing against the dragon's scales. The moment his skin touched the smooth surface, a surge of energy coursed through him. It was warm, vibrant, and powerful, an energy that filled every part of his being. His heart raced, his breath caught in his throat, and for a brief moment it felt as though he could hear the dragon's thoughts, its ancient memories, echoing in his mind. "You are ready," the dragon whispered, its voice deep and resonant in his head. "The bond is sealed. You are my protector, my rider, and together we will face the darkness that threatens to consume the world." A sense of calm washed over Thomas, and for the first time since the storm had begun, he felt a flicker of hope. He wasn't just a helpless sailor anymore. He was part of something far greater, something that could change the fate of the world. But just as Thomas began to feel the weight of the responsibility settle on his shoulders, a deep rumble echoed from the island. The ground beneath his feet trembled, and the air grew thick with a heavy, oppressive energy. The dragon's eyes flashed with warning. "The darkness is already here," the dragon growled, its voice filled with urgency. "We must prepare. There is no time left." Thomas's heart raced again as the air seemed to grow colder, the shadows deepening around them. He turned toward the horizon, but the sky had darkened once more, and strange shapes began to appear in the distance, shadowy figures that seemed to move with unnatural speed. The island, once peaceful, was now a battleground. The dragon spread its wings wide, its body tensing, ready for what was to come. Thomas's hands clenched into fists as he stepped forward, standing beside the dragon. "What do we do?" Thomas asked, his voice steady but filled with determination. The dragon's golden eyes locked onto his, and for a moment they seemed to share an understanding, an unspoken promise. "We fight together." As the first shadowy figure emerged from the trees, Thomas knew his life would never be the same. The bond was formed, and with it, a new chapter in his journey had begun. There was no turning back now. The wind howled through the trees, and the once serene island now felt alive with a dark energy. The shadows seemed to stretch farther, curling and twisting with an unnatural presence. Thomas stood next to the dragon, his heart still pounding from the battle that had just occurred. The shadowy figures, creatures made of darkness, had appeared from nowhere, as though summoned by an unseen force. The dragon had fended them off with powerful bursts of fire and magic, but the fight had left its mark. The island was far from safe, and Thomas could feel the weight of their situation settling on his shoulders. The dragon, though victorious, was clearly weakened. Its wings drooped slightly, and its breath came in ragged gasps. The power that had surged through them both during the battle had left them drained, but the dragon's eyes still burned with the same intensity. "We must find shelter, Thomas," the dragon said, its voice a deep rumble that resonated in Thomas's mind. "This island holds secrets, secrets that may help us understand the forces that seek to destroy us. We must uncover them before the darkness grows stronger." Thomas nodded, though he had no idea what the dragon was referring to. He didn't understand the magic or the ancient powers that seemed to control everything now. All he knew was that he had been thrust into a world he couldn't begin to comprehend, and that the fate of more than just his own life rested on his shoulders. The dragon's words echoed in his mind, and he couldn't help but feel that he was tied to this island in ways he couldn't explain. The storm had brought him here for a reason. He was here for a purpose, even if he didn't yet understand it. The dragon led him deeper into the island, its wings folded tightly against its body. They moved past thick, overgrown trees, their roots twisted and ancient. The air was dense with the smell of damp earth and salt water, but there was something else, too, a strange metallic scent like the remnants of a long-forgotten magic. After what felt like hours of walking, they came to a clearing. The ground was covered in smooth, flat stones that seemed to pulse with a faint blue glow. At the center of the clearing stood a massive structure, an ancient temple, its stone walls overgrown with vines and moss. It looked as though it had been abandoned for centuries, its surface worn by time and neglect. But there was no mistaking the power that still lingered here. The dragon stepped forward, its massive claws clicking against the stone. It circled the temple once, inspecting the structure before it turned to face Thomas. "This is where it began," the dragon said, its voice low and filled with reverence. "The dragon riders were born here. This temple was the heart of our order. The knowledge within these walls is more than just history, it is the key to defeating the darkness." Thomas felt a chill run down his spine. The air around them seemed to grow heavier, as though the temple itself was watching them. "History?" Thomas asked, his voice cracking slightly. "What happened here? Why is everything so dark?" The dragon's gaze softened as it looked down at him, its golden eyes filled with something that could only be described as sorrow. "The darkness that seeks to consume us has always been there, Thomas. It has lived in the shadows, growing stronger with each passing century. My kind was once the protectors of this world, but we were betrayed by those we trusted. The dragon riders were meant to stand against the darkness, but in the end, we were overrun. This temple is all that remains." Thomas swallowed hard. The weight of the dragon's words pressed on him, but there was something more in the air now, a sense of urgency. The darkness was not just a past threat. It was here now, and it was coming for them. The dragon moved to the entrance of the temple, its massive form blocking the door. With a single motion, it raised a clawed hand, and the stone door slowly began to slide open. The sound of grinding stone filled the air, and for a moment, the silence that followed was almost unbearable. Inside, the temple was bathed in dim, golden light. The walls were lined with ancient carvings, depicting dragons soaring across vast skis and humans standing beside them in unity. But as Thomas stepped inside, he saw something that made his blood run cold. At the far end of the temple stood a large stone pedestal, and upon it lay an object, a sword. The blade glowed faintly, its hilt adorned with the same symbols that were on the dragon's neck. The sword was unmistakably ancient, but there was something else about it, something that drew Thomas in. "That is the blade of the last rider," the dragon said, its voice filled with awe. "It was forged at the beginning of the dragon rider's order. It is a weapon of immense power, one that can be wielded only by a true rider. It is said that whoever holds the blade will have the strength to stand against the darkness." Thomas's heart raced as he took a cautious step toward the pedestal. The sword seemed to call to him, its power undeniable. He hesitated, his hand hovering above the blade. But before he could touch it, the ground beneath him trembled, and a low growl echoed from the shadows. "No," the dragon whispered urgently. "It is not yet your time." But it was too late. A deafening roar filled the air, and the temple shook violently. From the shadows at the back of the room, dark figures emerged, creatures made of pure shadow, their eyes glowing with a sickly red light. They moved with terrifying speed, and Thomas could feel the evil radiating from them. They were not the same creatures he had fought earlier on the island. These were something far worse. The dragon leapt forward, its wings spread wide and its claws slashed through the air, sending the shadow creatures flying. But there were too many of them. The battle was just beginning. "Thomas," the dragon's voice echoed in his mind, "you must protect the blade. It is the key to our survival." But Thomas didn't know how to fight. He had no weapons, no training. The only thing he could do was stand there, watching as the dragon fought, its every movement a blur of power and fury. He had to do something. He had to help. As the shadow creatures closed in, Thomas took a deep breath and reached for the blade of the last rider. The air inside the temple was thick with tension. Thomas stood frozen, his hand still hovering over the blade of the last rider, the hum of its power sending a strange shiver down his spine. The shadows in the temple were moving now, shifting like smoke. He could feel them, even without seeing them, darkness coiling and expanding, suffocating the space around him. The dragon fought valiantly, slashing with its claws and sending fiery bursts of magic to drive back the shadow creatures. But for every one the dragon destroyed, two more seemed to appear in its place, as though they were endless. "Hurry, Thomas," the dragon's voice roared in his mind. "The blade is the only way to turn the tide. You must wield it or we will not survive." Thomas's heart pounded in his chest. He had no training with weapons. How could he, a sailor, ever hope to wield such an ancient, powerful artifact? Yet, as the dragon's voice filled his mind, he felt the same strange pull towards the blade, as though it was calling to him, urging him to take it. It was the only way, the dragon had said, but the pressure was immense. In the corner of his vision, Thomas saw the dragon being pushed back by the sheer number of shadow creatures. Its fiery breath lit up the room, but the creatures were relentless. They surrounded it, claws and teeth flashing in the dim light, a mass of darkness that seemed to grow stronger with every passing second. With a deep breath, Thomas made his decision. This was it. There was no turning back now. He had to act, or they would both be consumed by the very darkness that had hunted the dragons for centuries. He stepped forward, his hand shaking as he gripped the hilt of the blade. The moment his fingers made contact, the entire temple seemed to shudder. The ground beneath him vibrated, and an overwhelming wave of energy washed over him. It was as if the blade itself had come alive, bonding with him, filling him with strength and power. The symbols on the hilt glowed brighter, the ancient runes glowing with a blinding light. The shadow creatures recoiled as the light from the blade pulsed through the temple. They hissed, retreating from the weapon's power, their forms flickering and writhing like smoke in the wind. But it wasn't enough. They were still coming, closing in on Thomas and the dragon with unrelenting force. "You are the last dragon rider," the dragon's voice echoed in Thomas's mind, calmer now, but filled with an urgency that made his blood run cold. "You must summon the strength within. This is your destiny. You were chosen for this moment. Fight, Thomas." Without thinking, Thomas raised the blade, its glowing edge slicing through the air. As he did, the power within him surged to life. It wasn't just the magic of the blade, it was something deeper, something ancient. It was the power of the dragon riders, passed down through generations, now coursing through his veins. He could feel it now, the connection to the dragon, to the dragons of old. They were with him. A pulse of light exploded from the blade, the energy radiating outward in a wave of brilliance. The shadow creatures screamed, their forms dissolving into the air, fading away like mist in the morning sun. The temple shook violently as the force of the energy collided with the darkness. The creatures crumbled before it, unable to withstand the power of the last dragon rider. Thomas's body trembled with the strain of wielding such immense power. He had never felt anything like it before, raw, untamed magic that felt both alien and familiar. The blade felt heavy in his hand, but at the same time, it felt like an extension of himself, as though it had always been a part of him, waiting for the right moment. But the victory was short-lived. A deep guttural growl filled the temple, and the ground beneath Thomas's feet cracked open. From the shadows, something far more menacing began to emerge, an enormous figure, darker than anything Thomas had ever seen. Its eyes glowed with an infernal red light, and its presence was suffocating, filling the air with an overwhelming sense of dread. The dragon roared, its body tensing as it prepared to fight, but the creature was unlike anything they had faced before. This wasn't just another shadow creature. It was something older, more powerful. The air around it crackled with dark energy, and Thomas could feel the temperature drop as it moved forward. "No, this cannot be," the dragon whispered in disbelief. Thomas's grip on the blade tightened. He didn't know what this creature was, but he knew one thing for certain. It was the darkness the dragon had spoken of. The evil that had hunted the dragons for centuries, and now it had found them. The creature's eyes locked onto Thomas, and it smiled, revealing rows of sharp, jagged teeth. "So, you are the last rider," it said, its voice a low, terrifying growl. "How fitting. You will be the last to fall." Thomas's heart raced. The blade pulsed with energy, but it was clear that the creature was far beyond anything he could have imagined. His hands shook, and doubt began to creep into his mind. Was he really ready for this? Was he strong enough to defeat this ancient evil? The dragon's voice broke through his thoughts. "You are ready, Thomas. The blade is more than just a weapon. It is a symbol of the bond between us, a bond that can never be broken. You are the last of the dragon riders. You are the only one who can stop this evil." Thomas's breath caught in his throat. He looked down at the blade, feeling its power surge through him once again. The dragon was right. This wasn't just about survival. This was his destiny. He had been chosen for this moment. He raised the blade high, and as he did, the ground beneath him trembled once more. The creature lunged, its massive form moving faster than Thomas could react, but just as it reached him, a burst of light erupted from the blade. The force of the energy sent the creature stumbling back, but it wasn't enough to stop it. The battle had only just begun. The temple shook with a deafening roar. The darkness that had been creeping at the edges of Thomas's vision was now fully alive, manifesting before him in the form of an ancient, monstrous creature. The air was thick with malevolent energy, crackling as the creature's presence seemed to suck the very life out of the room. Its eyes burned a bright, fiery red, glowing with the promise of destruction. A deep growl rumbled from its throat, sending tremors through the stone walls of the temple. The dragon, still recovering from the earlier battle, stood firm beside Thomas, but its body was weary. "You are not ready for this fight, Thomas," the dragon warned, its voice low and filled with unease. "This creature, it is the embodiment of the darkness that has hunted my kin. It is the one who brought about the fall of the dragon riders. This is our final test." Thomas could barely breathe as the weight of the dragon's words pressed down on him. He had already seen the power of the blade, but he knew, deep in his bones, that it would take more than a weapon to face this creature. He wasn't just fighting for his life anymore. He was fighting for the survival of the world itself. His connection to the dragon, to the ancient power of the dragon riders, was the only thing that could tip the scales in their favor. The creature loomed above them, a towering nightmare made of shadows, its massive, clawed hands reaching out toward Thomas with a hunger that made his skin crawl. "So, the last dragon rider stands before me," it sneered, its voice dripping with malice. "You think you can stop me? You are nothing but a child playing at being a hero." Thomas clenched his jaw, pushing back the fear that threatened to overtake him. "I'm not afraid of you," he said, his voice surprisingly steady. The blade in his hand pulsed with energy, the runes on its hilt glowing brighter as if responding to his determination. The creature's mocking laughter filled the temple, and it lunged, its massive jaws snapping shut with a sickening crack. The dragon reacted instantly, lunging to meet it head-on, its claws clashing against the creature's dark form in a burst of sparks. Thomas stumbled back, barely dodging the creature's wild strike, feeling the force of its movement stir the air around him. The dragon's fiery breath blazed against the creature, but the shadowy beast seemed impervious to the flame. "This creature is not like the others, Thomas," the dragon warned, barely holding its ground. "It is not bound by the laws of nature. It is an ancient evil, one that has existed since the dawn of time. It is the very darkness that has consumed the dragons." Thomas's heart raced as he watched the dragon struggle. The creature was stronger than anything he had ever faced. Its power was overwhelming. He had to do something. He couldn't just stand there. He had to fight. In a surge of desperation, Thomas raised the blade of the last rider and charged forward, the weapon gleaming with the light of the ancient magic within it. As he ran, he could feel the weight of the dragon's power filling him, coursing through his veins. He could feel the bond they shared, and for the first time it felt like he truly understood the dragon rider legacy. The blade wasn't just a weapon. It was a symbol of his strength, his connection to the dragon, and his duty to protect everything they held dear. The creature turned toward him, its eyes narrowing with hatred as it saw him approach. "Foolish child," it snarled, raising its massive clawed hands to strike. But Thomas didn't hesitate. As the creature lunged toward him, he swung the blade with every ounce of strength he could muster. The sword met the creature's claws with a deafening clash, and the force of the blow sent shockwaves through the temple. The creature hissed, recoiling for a moment, its dark form flickering with rage. But Thomas wasn't done. He pressed forward, determined to end this battle once and for all. The blade seemed to come alive in his hands, responding to his will, its power surging through him like fire. With each strike, the creature's form wavered, growing weaker under the intensity of the blade's light. The shadows that made up the creature began to dissipate, like smoke in the wind. The dragon, seeing the change, roared in approval. "You are doing it, Thomas. The blade is weakening the creature. Strike again and this nightmare will end." The creature let out a blood-curdling screech, its eyes flashing with pure rage. It lunged at Thomas one last time, its jaws snapping open to consume him. But Thomas was faster this time. With a final, powerful strike, he plunged the blade deep into the creature's chest, the light from the sword blinding in its intensity. The creature screamed, its form unraveling in a burst of dark energy. The power that had held it together shattered, and with a final, deafening roar, the creature exploded in a cloud of shadows, leaving nothing behind but the empty air and the lingering scent of destruction. Thomas stood panting, the blade still glowing in his hand. His body ached from the effort, his chest heaving as he tried to catch his breath. The temple around him was silent now, the oppressive darkness that had filled the space dissipating with the creature's death. But the weight of what had just happened sank in. The fight was over, but the war was far from won. The dragon slowly approached, its massive wings folding as it landed beside him, its golden eyes filled with pride and gratitude. "You did it, Thomas. You defeated the creature that has hunted my kind for centuries." Thomas looked down at the blade in his hand, still glowing faintly with power. "I couldn't have done it without you," he said, his voice filled with awe. The dragon's gaze softened. "We did it together. But the darkness is not gone, not yet. The forces that destroyed my kin are still out there, and there will be more battles to face. This is only the beginning." Thomas nodded slowly, the weight of his new role sinking in. The darkness had been pushed back, but he knew that the real battle was just beginning. The dragon's words echoed in his mind. "The legacy of the dragon riders has been reborn, but your journey is far from over." As the dragon spread its wings and began to ascend, Thomas followed, ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. He was no longer just a sailor. He was a protector, the last dragon rider, and he would fight for the future of the world, no matter what it took. To see what happens next in Thomas's journey, make sure to subscribe and stay tuned for the next chapter of this epic adventure. The silence that followed the destruction of the ancient creature was almost unbearable. The temple, once a place of light and power, now felt like a hollow shell, its walls scarred by the battle. The ground was cracked, and the air was thick with the lingering remnants of dark energy. Thomas stood at the center of the ruins, his chest heaving with exhaustion, his hand still tightly clutching the blade of the last rider. The dragon, now fully recovered from the fight, landed beside him, its enormous wings folding with grace. Its golden eyes, which had once been filled with doubt, now shone with pride. The weight of their victory hung in the air, but there was no time for celebration. They had won a battle, but the war was far from over. "You did well, Thomas," the dragon said, its voice soft but filled with reverence. "But there is much more to be done." Thomas nodded, his body sore, his mind racing. The victory over the ancient darkness was a turning point, yes, but the dragon's words haunted him. The forces that had hunted its kind for centuries were still out there. The world was still in peril, and it was up to him to protect it. He could feel the weight of responsibility bearing down on him, as if the entire fate of the world rested on his shoulders. "What now?" Thomas asked, his voice uncertain. "What are we supposed to do next?" The dragon turned its head to face the horizon, its gaze distant and contemplative. "We must rebuild. The world is still fractured, still broken from the darkness that has spread across it. The dragon riders were meant to protect this realm, to keep the balance between humans and dragons. But that balance was shattered when my kin fell. Now, we must find the other riders, those who can still be awakened, and rebuild what was lost." Thomas's heart raced at the mention of other riders. "Other riders, you mean? I'm not the only one." The dragon's eyes softened as it met Thomas's gaze. "You are the last of the original dragon riders, yes, but there are others, humans who have the potential to bond with dragons, to take up the mantle of protector once again. They may not know their destiny, but they will. And you must find them, Thomas. The future of the world depends on it." A sense of awe washed over Thomas, mixed with an overwhelming sense of fear. He had never asked for this. He had never wanted to be a protector, never wanted to fight in a war that spanned centuries. But now, it seemed, his destiny was sealed. He was the last dragon rider, the one chosen to lead the charge against the forces of darkness. He had no choice but to embrace this fate, no matter how impossible it seemed. The dragon took a step closer, its wings folding protectively around Thomas. "You are not alone in this. I will guide you. Together, we will find the others, and together, we will face the darkness that threatens to consume us all. You have proven yourself, Thomas, but the real test begins now." Thomas swallowed hard, the weight of the dragon's words sinking in. He wasn't just a sailor anymore. He was something greater. He was a protector, the last of the dragon riders, and his journey had only just begun. The blade of the last rider still pulsed with power in his hand, a constant reminder of the immense responsibility he now carried. The dragon's voice broke through his thoughts. "We must go. There is no time to waste." Without another word, the dragon spread its wings and soared into the air, the powerful gusts of wind lifting Thomas from the ground as he clung to its back. The world below seemed to shrink as they flew higher, the island disappearing behind them. The sky stretched out before them, dark and endless. Thomas's thoughts swirled in a chaotic whirlwind. He had just fought and won a battle against an ancient evil, but now he was facing an even greater challenge. Finding the other riders would not be easy, and he had no idea where to start. But one thing was certain. The journey ahead would test him in ways he couldn't yet understand. The dark forces that had been awakened would not rest. They would hunt him, hunt the dragons, and they would not stop until they had wiped out the last of the dragon riders. Thomas could feel it in his bones. The enemy was already gathering, already preparing to strike. The dragon's voice echoed in his mind again. "The darkness is coming, Thomas. The time of peace is over, but we will face it together as we always have." As they flew across the vast expanse of the sea, heading toward unknown lands and untold dangers, Thomas looked out at the horizon. The world was vast and the task before him was enormous, but he was no longer the man he had once been. He was no longer just Thomas, the sailor. He was the last dragon rider, and it was up to him to save the world. The first stars of the evening began to appear in the sky, twinkling like distant promises of hope. Despite the fear that gripped his heart, Thomas couldn't help but feel a flicker of determination. He was ready. Whatever lay ahead, he would face it. He had to. "Where do we start?" Thomas asked, his voice steady despite the weight of his new role. The dragon glanced down at him, its golden eyes gleaming in the starlight. "We start by finding those who are still out there, the riders who have yet to awaken, and we will begin our search in the distant lands beyond the mountains and the seas. It will be a long journey, but it is one we must undertake. We will rebuild the order, and together we will face the darkness." As they flew into the night, the world spread out before them, vast, uncertain, and full of danger. But Thomas no longer felt the fear that had once held him back. The dragon was with him, guiding him, and together they would restore the legacy of the dragon riders. The battle for the future of the world had only just begun. If you're eager to see what happens next in Thomas's journey, make sure to subscribe and stay tuned for the next chapter of this epic tale.